A special report, part one of a two-part series, where we take a journey to Selma.
It's a city just a few hours from Mobile, and it has gotten a lot of attention recently, and it's getting ready to celebrate 50 years since being the battleground of the civil rights movement.
News 5's Alan Carter takes a look.
If you didn't know what happened here, passing through it really wouldn't stand out. Less than 20,000 people live here. It takes about 15 minutes to get from one side to the other. If you blinked, you might miss it. But in terms of American history, Selma, Alabama is home to one of the most important chapters.
They thought the civil rights movement was changing their way of life, and it was. They saw it as a radical change from the way they'd always done things.
The one thing that does stand out in Selma, almost immediately, is the bridge that enters the city. But the Edmund Pettus Bridge is more than a physical landmark. It's a historical one.
The Bloody Sunday demonstration is what brought the attention to the whole world.
Annie Pearl Avery was 21 and on that bridge on March 7th, 1965.
Police grabbed me. I'm trying to move forward, and I'm hearing all these people screaming and going on. I'm trying to get forward to see what's going on.
She wasn't up there for very long.
And that's when we began to have this physical disagreement here about where I wanted to be and where he wanted me to be. And I was arrested.
Maybe a stroke of luck, she was put in jail, because what happened to many others who were on the Pettus Bridge was far worse. There's a reason they call it Bloody Sunday, a march that was planned to go to Montgomery, stopped with force before the 600 demonstrators got out of Selma.
While I was in jail, I could hear noises. I could hear people screaming and going on, but I didn't know what was going on outside because I couldn't see. You know, I could just hear. But this was the voices and the noises and the screams of people being beaten back to Brown Chapel.
The church still stands here today.
I think we knew what we were fighting for.
It's where we met Joyce O'Neill, who was also here that Bloody Sunday.
And some of my high school classmates were coming back from the bridge, some with blood running down their faces, some trying to strip their clothes off to get away from the tear gas.
What happened in Selma is much greater than the events of one day. For Annie and Joyce, a continued fight for equality and the right to vote.
So growing up in that environment, I think we expected not to be liked, and we expected that what we were doing would not be liked and then not be tolerated.
But their persistence led to a successful march where they did get to Montgomery and eventually the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Glory, hallelujah! Glory, hallelujah!
Fast forward 50 years as the nation remembers Selma. But what about Selma itself?
If you don't learn from history, you're subject to repeat it. And I think that Selma, Alabama has certainly learned from history. I think we would all openly tell you, I would, that what happened here in 1965 had a very positive result.
Ballard, the current probate judge in Dallas County, a significant position for Selma because he's in charge of election. He says it's remarkable that he could have been elected today because he's white, the county that is 65% black, something he says signifies the change and acceptance and tolerance the area has undergone. And Pete, tomorrow we're going to take a look at how Selma is doing today. Is it any better off than it was there 50 years ago? That's part two of our special, The Journey to Selma.
All right, a lot of history in that small town. We'll look forward to part two tomorrow. Thanks, Al.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, part two of a News 5 special report, The Journey to Selma.
We sent our Alan Carter to the historic city, and yesterday he took a look back at the role Selma played in the civil rights movement.
Today, we examine how the city is holding up.
For the people who live here, there's a strong pride attached to their city.
It's a good deal to live in Selma. I love living in Selma.
Home of one of America's most monumental moments, one for the history books. Although for some that are still here, they don't need to dive into pages. They only have to remember.
Well, they were scary times, to be honest.
While important, activists like Joyce O'Neill remind you that it's also one of the uglier times.
I don't know whether they had been deputized, but they were on horseback. They had billy clubs, they had shotguns, they had rifles, they had pistols, they had everything, and they would stand on the corners to intimidate.
Only 50 years ago. So you can understand the conundrum. Sure, there's pride, but also a desire to move past.
It becomes a real place, a place where people do live and work. It's not just a historical place, but people live their lives here.
But coming to a place like this barbershop,
try and keep it on the minds of the youngsters, perhaps anybody that walked through the door,
where Drew Wells makes sure you can't forget. The reminders are on the walls.
to see our youngsters and the people, black and white, who volunteered and sacrificed their life to make it better for us, it did something to me.
We spent time with Drew because of his honesty, because while the pride is there,
I'm proud to be from Selma. I mean, I don't deny my city at all.
in the same breath he'll tell you it's far from perfect.
I don't want to be the one that label the city, man, but Selma still needs help, drastically.
People are leaving the city, down nearly 8,500 since 1960, a close to 30% decline. According to census data, one of the poorest cities where 31% of the people are below the poverty line. And then there's the crime.
These kids are killing like it's funny. You know, we need help in that sense, man. You know, that's why we, the generation, my generation, we don't focus on the history too much because we've got too much of the present going on right now.
A violent crime rate nearly 3 times the state average.
It won't be a Selma in another couple of years, man, because all the businesses are going to go somewhere else.
You really feel that way?
Yeah, I feel that way. For real. All the businesses going to close down and go somewhere else because nobody want to live here because of the crime.
The Voting Rights Act was passed because of what happened here in 1965. President Barack Obama probably would not be president if Selma hadn't had the activities in 1965.
Kim Ballard is a probate judge of Dallas County in charge of elections. What concerns him now is even when you consider what Selma means for voting rights, you couldn't tell at the polls.
Have you got any idea what our turnout was the last election we had? We brag when we have 30% turnout. Now, how in the world can especially an African-American voter, justify in their mind not voting in 2015?
And when it comes to race, there isn't quite a consensus as to how much progress has actually been made.
You don't want to forget that. It's very important to Selma, and a lot was learned from that, good and bad.
As far as race, I mean, I feel like it's in a good place. I feel like, you know, we all look at each other, and some people may still see color, but I mean, other people, I feel like, you know, they see people.
We're certainly not like we were in 1965. There's been a huge attitude shift, change, mainly from the white community.
A lot of our minorities are still frustrated. You know, we're still left out of the franchise process, and, you know, like I said, there's a lot of verbal dialogue about, you know, civil rights, but when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, I don't think there's a whole lot of change.
Between the lack of voting and in some cases the apathy, Miss O'Neill just wants people to remember what it was they fought for.
The young guys here probably don't really understand what Jim Crow was all about, because if they did, they would know that now they can do a lot more than we did back then.
And every year in Selma, people recreate the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. This year, they're expecting a visit from President Obama, who will speak the day before the march. Then on March 7th, demonstrators will mark the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. News 5 will be there that weekend and will have full coverage. Reporting live tonight in the newsroom, Alan Carter, News 5.